Marilyn Monroe remains one of the most iconic figures in Hollywood history, a symbol of beauty, glamour, and tragedy. Behind the dazzling smile and legendary performances, however, was a woman haunted by loneliness, betrayal, and the pressures of fame. From a turbulent childhood to her rise as a global superstar, and ultimately to her mysterious and heartbreaking death, at just 36, Monroe's life was filled with both triumph and sorrow. This is the seriously tragic story of Marilyn Monroe, the woman the world adored, but never truly understood. Marilyn Monroe was born Norma Jean Mortensen on June 1, 1926, and from the very start, her life was complicated. Her mother, Gladys Baker, had already been divorced once and separated from another husband by the time Norma Jean was born, meaning that by the rigid standards of the time, she was considered illegitimate. Unfortunately, her rocky start in life was just the beginning of a childhood filled with instability and heartbreak. Raising a child alone was difficult under any circumstances, but for Gladys it proved impossible. Struggling with financial troubles, mental health issues, and an unstable career in Hollywood, she made the painful decision to place Norma Jean in foster care shortly after birth. Though she contributed what little she could for her daughter's care, Gladys knew she wasn't prepared to raise a baby on her own. For the first few years of her life, Norma Jean was placed with the Bolender family, a deeply religious couple who took her in as a foster child. Meanwhile, Gladys continued working, hoping to eventually bring her daughter home. During this time, Norma Jean found some measure of stability until fate intervened, forcing her mother back into her life in the most disastrous way possible. By the time Norma Jean was 7 years old, Gladys decided she was ready to take on single motherhood. But the timing couldn't have been worse. She was reeling from profound personal tragedies. She had already lost a son from a previous marriage, and around the same time she discovered that her father had died by suicide. These losses, combined with her long-standing mental health struggles, pushed her into a downward spiral. The weight of her grief manifested in terrifying ways. Overcome with paranoia and delusions, Gladys began blaming Norma Jean for surviving while her brother had died. She became increasingly unstable until, in 1934, authorities were forced to step in. She was officially diagnosed with paranoid schizophrenia and committed to a psychiatric institution, leaving Norma Jean to fend for herself in the foster system. With her mother institutionalized, Norma Jean was sent to a Los Angeles orphanage where she felt abandoned and unloved. She soon entered a cycle of foster homes, more than 10 in total. Her father was nowhere to be found, leaving her with no real family or stability. Many of these foster placements were far from safe. One of the most horrifying experiences occurred when she was just 10 years old. A foster father lured her into a bedroom, locked the door, and assaulted her. Traumatized, Norma Jean developed a stutter and began struggling in school. It was in that moment she realized a painful truth. She had little control over her fate, and there were few options available to protect herself. On June 19th, 1942, Norma Jean married James Doherty at just 16 years old. The marriage provided an escape from the foster system and the looming threat of returning to an orphanage, but it didn't offer the excitement or fulfillment she longed for. Her new role as a housewife quickly became monotonous. When Doherty, a Marine, was stationed on Catalina Island, she searched for ways to fill her time, taking up weightlifting and surfing. But no matter how many distractions she found, the truth was undeniable. Her marriage felt like a cage, and she was desperate to break free. Because she married so young, Norma Jean dropped out of high school, giving up any hope of a formal education. Had the marriage been a true partnership, the sacrifice might have felt worthwhile, but Doherty's vision of a wife was suffocating. She began to realize that she wanted more than a quiet domestic life. Her future wasn't on Catalina Island, and it certainly wasn't with James Dougherty. In 1944, her fate took another unexpected turn. While working in a munitions factory to support the war effort, an Army photographer arrived to take morale-boosting photos of women contributing to wartime production. Norma Jean's striking features immediately caught his attention. Though her pictures weren't used, the experience sparked something inside her. Modeling intrigued her, and for the first time she saw a possible future beyond housework and routine. Just a year later, she walked away from her marriage to chase that dream. By 1946, still only 19 years old, Norma Jean finalized her divorce from Dougherty, eager to leave behind the dull routine of married life. With no ties holding her back, she threw herself into pin-up modeling, unaware that this decision would set the course for the rest of her life. But just as she was finding her footing in the industry, someone from her past reappeared. Her mother, Gladys Baker, newly released from the psychiatric ward. Determined to transform herself into a star, Norma Jean worked tirelessly to change her appearance and persona. She bleached her dark hair blonde, exercised to shed what industry insiders called baby fat, and crafted a glamorous new style. Meanwhile, her mother's return proved to be anything but a happy reunion. Gladys, still unstable, attempted to reconnect with her daughter, but was often cruel, belittling Norma Jean's aspirations. Before long, Gladys left again, this time to Idaho, where she entered a scandalous relationship with a married man. Her mother's sudden, chaotic visit in 1946 shook Norma Jean to her core, but she had no time to dwell on personal pain. She had bigger plans. Shifting her focus from modeling to film, she began landing small, uncredited roles. It was during this time that she started using the name Marilyn Monroe, though unofficially at first. Determined to make it in Hollywood, she set her sights on breaking into the industry any way she could. In the late 1940s, Monroe took whatever roles she could get, often relegated to playing secretary or extra at square dance. Many of her scenes ended up on the cutting room floor, but she refused to be discouraged. Determined to secure bigger opportunities, she worked her way into industry circles, forging connections with studio executives. However, her ambition led her into uncomfortable situations, including encounters with the notorious casting couch culture that many young actresses endured. By 1947, Monroe was socializing with Hollywood's elite. According to Charlie Chaplin Jr.'s autobiography, she briefly dated him, only for him to later walk in on her in bed with his brother, Sidney Chaplin. Marilyn Monroe quickly discovered the darker side of Hollywood. Powerful men in the industry saw young actresses as disposable, and Monroe was no exception. One studio executive allegedly agreed to offer her a contract, but only on the condition that she be available to him whenever he called. When that contract expired, a Columbia executive tried the same tactic. This time, Monroe refused. As a result, the studio let her go. She had lost another opportunity, but she refused to give up, determined to make it in Hollywood on her own terms. By 1949, Monroe was still an unknown actress and struggling financially. Desperate to pay her rent, she posed nude for photographer Tom Kelly, believing it to be a quick, temporary solution to her money troubles. What she didn't realize was that these images would later resurface right at the height of her fame, causing a media frenzy that would put her under an even brighter spotlight. However, she would handle the controversy with unexpected wit and confidence. Her persistence finally paid off in 1950 when she landed small but memorable roles in All About Eve and The Asphalt Jungle. Though her screen time was brief, she made a lasting impression, Critics and audiences took notice of her striking presence, and before long, her name was appearing in Hollywood's top gossip columns. While she was gaining attention for her performances, she was also making headlines for her romantic entanglements, further fueling her growing mystique. But just as her career was beginning to take off, Monroe suffered a devastating personal loss. Her agent and mentor, Johnny Hyde, who had tirelessly championed her career, died suddenly of a heart attack. She described him as her greatest friend, and his passing left her shattered. For days she wept inconsolably, sinking into a deep depression. Some accounts even suggest that this loss pushed her to the brink of suicide. In the aftermath of Hyde's death, Monroe reportedly attempted an overdose. A friend discovered her barely conscious and intervened just in time. Though she survived, it was a chilling preview of the many times her mental health would buckle under the weight of her sorrows. Still, she refused to let grief define her. She pressed forward, refining the breathy, glamorous persona that would make her one of Hollywood's most iconic stars. By 1952, Monroe was on the verge of superstardom, with leading roles in Don't Bother to Knock and Monkey Business. But just as her career was reaching new heights, the nude photos she had taken in 1949 came back to haunt her. Instead of trying to cover them up or deny their existence, Monroe turned the scandal into a publicity win. When a reporter asked if she had been completely naked in the photos, she famously replied, "Oh no, I had the radio on." With that, she took control of the narrative, transforming what could have been a career-ending controversy into a moment of bold self-ownership. Behind her growing fame, however, Monroe was quietly battling a painful condition. She suffered from severe endometriosis, which caused chronic pelvic pain and made conception difficult. In 1952, she underwent surgery for the condition. Before the operation, she taped a desperate note to her stomach, pleading with doctors not to remove her ovaries. Her struggle with infertility would continue to torment her, leading to miscarriages and profound heartbreak over her dreams of becoming a mother. By 1953, Hollywood had fully embraced Marilyn Monroe as the ultimate blonde bombshell. Studios kept casting her in comedic roles that played up her sex appeal, often portraying her as a ditzy but irresistible woman. But Monroe, who had an IQ of 168 and was an avid reader, despised being typecast. She longed for more serious roles, frustrated by the industry's refusal to see her as anything beyond a pretty face. Still, despite her personal misgivings, she delivered iconic comedic performances, subtly mocking the very stereotype she was forced to embody. Behind the scenes, however, Monroe struggled with crippling insecurity, which made her difficult to work with. She relied heavily on acting coaches, obsessively rehearsing her lines, only to freeze when the cameras rolled. Her perfectionism often led to dozens of takes, frustrating directors and crew members. To make matters worse, her chronic tardiness became infamous in the industry. While co-stars and directors were often charmed by her vulnerability, patience behind the scenes was wearing thin. While her career soared, her personal life took a new turn. In late 1952, she began dating Joe DiMaggio, the legendary New York Yankees slugger. They seemed an unlikely pair. She was a dazzling Hollywood star, while he was a quiet, traditional man uncomfortable with the spotlight. Still, their romance captivated the public, and on January 14, 1954, they married in a civil ceremony at San Francisco City Hall, instantly becoming America's hottest celebrity couple. But their honeymoon phase wouldn't last long. Trouble was brewing just months into their marriage. DiMaggio struggled to accept how the film industry portrayed his wife. He resented the way Hollywood sexualized her, often objecting to the scripts she was offered. He wanted a traditional wife, while Monroe refused to be controlled. To her, his attempts to dictate her career felt stifling and overbearing. To him, her defiance was a sign of disrespect. As they both juggled demanding schedules, their relationship became increasingly strained. Their marriage came to a breaking point 9 months later. While filming The 7-Year Itch, Monroe famously stood over a subway grate as the breeze lifted her skirt, a moment that would become one of the most iconic images in film history. As crowds of onlookers cheered, DiMaggio, watching from the sidelines, seethed with jealousy and rage. Later that night, he allegedly lashed out at Monroe in their hotel room. Days later, she filed for divorce, citing mental cruelty. Tearfully, she announced to the press that their marriage was over. Even after their split, DiMaggio couldn't let go. He became obsessed, disguising himself to loiter in hotel lobbies, tapping her phone, and even barging into her home unannounced, convinced she was seeing other men. At one point, he orchestrated an ill-conceived raid on an apartment where he thought she was having an affair, only to find a bewildered 50-year-old secretary instead. The failed raid exposed DiMaggio's desperation, embarrassing him publicly. The secretary threatened legal action, but DiMaggio quickly apologized, diffusing the situation before it turned into a full-blown scandal. Meanwhile, Monroe moved forward, navigating new relationships, while occasionally glancing back at the lingering presence of her ex-husband. Their love-hate dynamic would continue for years, entangling them long after their divorce. Now single, Monroe made headlines as she stepped out with several high-profile men. Some rumors linked her to Marlon Brando, a rising star known for his rebellious charisma, while others speculated she was involved with Frank Sinatra, a close friend of DiMaggio, which only fueled more gossip. But despite the attention surrounding her love life, Monroe seemed more focused on her career than on finding lasting romance. She was determined to prove that she was more than just Hollywood's most glamorous blonde. She wanted to be taken seriously as an actress. In 1954, when Ella Fitzgerald, one of the greatest jazz singers of all time, was denied a booking at a popular nightclub due to segregation policies, Monroe stepped in. She promised the club owner that if they booked Fitzgerald, she would personally sit in the front row for every performance. The manager agreed, and with Monroe in attendance, Fitzgerald's shows became sellouts, further propelling her career. Just 2 years later, Monroe shocked the world again, but this time it was for something far more personal. On June 29, 1956, she quietly married Arthur Miller, the acclaimed playwright best known for Death of a Salesman. The public saw them as an unlikely pair, the intellectual writer and the glamorous blonde bombshell. Miller had left his first wife for Monroe, while she longed for a relationship with someone who truly understood her. She believed she had found stability with Miller, but their differences would soon prove too great to overcome. Shortly after their wedding, Monroe took another symbolic step in redefining herself. Although she had used the stage name Marilyn Monroe professionally for years, she legally changed her name from Norma Jean Mortensen to Marilyn Monroe following her marriage. When a fan asked for an autograph, she hesitated before asking, "How do you spell Marilyn?" It was as if, in that moment, she was consciously erasing Norma Jean once and for all. However, her marriage to Miller was far from the intellectual and loving partnership she had imagined. The man who had once admired her depth and vulnerability began to see her as fragile, unstable, and overly dependent on sleeping pills. He grew frustrated with her insecurities, and according to some accounts, he even documented his disillusionment in his journal, deliberately leaving it where Monroe would find it. When Monroe inevitably stumbled upon Miller's private writings, she was devastated. In cold, detached words, he had described her as needy, embarrassing, and an emotional burden. The discovery shattered her. She had already battled self-doubt her entire life, and now the man she had married, the one person she had believed truly understood her, had reduced her to a caricature of weakness. At the same time, Monroe was facing another professional crisis. In 1957, while filming The Prince and the Showgirl opposite Laurence Olivier, her mounting anxiety made every day on set a struggle. She over-prepared for scenes, but then froze when the cameras rolled, unable to deliver a performance that satisfied either herself or the notoriously impatient Olivier. At one point, exasperated, he snapped at her, "Just be sexy." It was a crushing blow for Monroe, who desperately wanted to be taken seriously as an actress, not just admired for her looks. Adding to her heartbreak, Monroe was also experiencing devastating losses in her personal life. More than anything, she wanted to be a mother, but between 1956 and 1958, she suffered 3 heartbreaking pregnancies, 2 miscarriages and 1 ectopic pregnancy. Each loss weighed heavily on her already fragile psyche, and after years of hoping, she eventually resigned herself to the realization that she would never have children of her own. Billy Wilder, the director of Some Like It Hot, had grown so frustrated with Marilyn Monroe's erratic behavior on set that when filming wrapped, he threw a party for the cast and crew, but deliberately excluded her. He didn't stop there. In post-production interviews, he openly criticized Monroe, venting about her lateness, her reliance on acting coaches, and the endless delays she caused. Monroe, furious at the public betrayal, decided to respond in her own blunt way. She called Wilder's home and left a message with his wife. "Tell him he can go F himself." Despite all the backstage drama, Some Like It Hot became a critically acclaimed classic, proving that even with all her on-set struggles, Monroe could still deliver cinematic magic. But Hollywood wasn't as forgiving. Although the film was a box office smash, the production delays had cost the studio $500,000, an astronomical sum at the time. Executives couldn't ignore Monroe's undeniable star power, but they also dreaded working with her again. The unpredictability, the pill-fueled episodes, the difficulty on set, it was all too much. As a result, studios began rejecting her for major roles, including one that would have been perfect for her, Breakfast at Tiffany's. Instead, the part went to Audrey Hepburn, marking the moment when Hollywood started looking for other actresses to fill the void Monroe had created. Still, Monroe wasn't just the difficult star people whispered about. She also had moments of incredible generosity. While filming Let's Make Love, 1960, she quietly helped a grieving crew member. After hearing that his wife had died and that he couldn't afford the funeral costs, she anonymously donated $1,000 to cover the expenses. Even while battling her own demons, she had the ability to empathize with the pain of others. Her personal life, however, was unraveling. During Let's Make Love, she began an affair with her co-star, Yves Montand. Some sources suggest she even became pregnant with his child, though nothing came of the relationship. Meanwhile, her marriage to Arthur Miller was in freefall. The tensions that had simmered beneath the surface for years would soon erupt during her next film, a production that turned out to be even more disastrous than the last. The Misfits, 1961, was supposed to be a cinematic masterpiece, starring Monroe, Clark Gable, and Montgomery Clift. But behind the scenes, it was an absolute disaster. Both Monroe and Clift were battling addictions, while their director, John Huston, was a heavy drinker who would often disappear for long stretches to gamble. Worse yet, the screenplay had been written by Miller, forcing him and Monroe to work together despite their failing marriage. The tension was unbearable, and the entire production became toxic. Miller had originally written The Misfits as a love letter to Monroe, hoping it would somehow mend their marriage. Instead, it drove them further apart. Within weeks, they stopped sleeping in the same room, communicating only through Monroe's acting coach. To make matters worse, Monroe watched in humiliation as Miller openly flirted with photographer Inge Morath, who would later become his next wife. The betrayal cut her deeply. On November 11, 1960, Marilyn Monroe and Arthur Miller officially announced their divorce. For Monroe, the end of her marriage was another devastating loss. Rather than finding solace, she was met with yet another betrayal. Miller quickly grew close to Inge Morath, the woman Monroe had suspected of being his lover. Feeling abandoned and emotionally shattered, she confided in friends that she had considered jumping from her apartment balcony. As winter set in, her struggles escalated, leading to one of the darkest experiences of her life. In early 1961, Monroe's downward spiral reached a terrifying low. Her psychoanalyst, believing she needed more intensive care, arranged for her to be committed to a psychiatric ward against her will. Expecting rest and treatment, Monroe instead found herself locked in a padded cell, threatened with being restrained in a straitjacket. She felt trapped, powerless, and dehumanized, later calling the experience inhuman. In a fit of desperation, she shattered a window in an attempt to escape. It was Joe DiMaggio, her ex-husband, and, by then, one of the few people still fiercely loyal to her, who ultimately rescued her. Outraged, he stormed into the facility and demanded her release, using his influence to get her out. Despite her fragile state, Monroe continued searching for love and stability. Between 1961 and 1962, she had an on and off relationship with Frank Sinatra, a close friend of DiMaggio, which made the situation even more complicated. There were also whispers of a brief fling with Warren Beatty, who was just beginning his rise in Hollywood. But these romances were nothing compared to the most sensational rumors of all: her alleged affairs with the most powerful men in America, the Kennedy brothers. On May 19, 1962, Monroe delivered what would become one of the most iconic performances of all time, her sultry, intimate rendition of Happy Birthday to President John F. Kennedy at Madison Square Garden. The breathy, flirtatious performance sent rumors into overdrive. Many believed she and JFK had been lovers, and while the details remain murky, most historians now agree that the two had, at the very least, spent the night together. But Monroe's entanglement with the Kennedy family didn't end there. Some sources suggest that Monroe also had an affair with Robert F. Kennedy, JFK's younger brother and Attorney General of the United States. Caught between the two men, she reportedly confided in friends that she felt used, adding yet another layer of emotional turmoil to her already fragile state. As her mental health declined, she became more reliant on prescription medications, filming less and struggling just to keep herself together. On August 5, 1962, Marilyn Monroe was found lifeless in her Brentwood home at just 36 years old. She was discovered face down on her bed, a telephone still in her hand, with an empty pill bottle nearby. The coroner ruled her death a probable suicide caused by a barbiturate overdose, but something about the scene didn't sit right with many. The inconsistencies surrounding her death fueled speculation that continues to this day. Adding to the mystery, the coroner's report had glaring omissions. Only Monroe's liver was tested for toxins, and according to conflicting accounts, her other organs either vanished or were deliberately destroyed. These irregularities sparked widespread rumors that she hadn't taken her own life at all, but had instead been silenced by powerful figures. Over the years, theories have run wild. Some believe Bobby Kennedy orchestrated her death to keep her from exposing their alleged affair. Others suggest the CIA had her killed to undermine the Kennedy family. The mafia has also been implicated in conspiracy theories. While no solid proof has ever surfaced, the controversy surrounding Monroe's passing continues to overshadow her official cause of death. In the wake of the tragedy, Joe DiMaggio took control of the funeral arrangements. Honoring Monroe's wishes, he kept the ceremony small, with only about 30 guests in attendance. She was laid to rest in a simple apple green nylon jersey dress, holding a bouquet of pink roses. However, an unsettling detail emerged. Her platinum hair had been partially shaved during the autopsy, forcing morticians to fit her with a wig. Those who attended described the service as heartbreakingly intimate, a stark contrast to the larger-than-life persona she had projected. Marilyn Monroe's life was a captivating blend of brilliance and heartbreak. She was a woman who longed for love and respect, but was often reduced to a mere image, a blonde bombshell, rather than the intelligent, complex person she was. Even in death, she remains a mystery, with speculation surrounding her final days persisting to this day. But beyond the myths and conspiracies, her legacy endures through her films, her fashion, and her undeniable impact on pop culture. What are your thoughts on Marilyn Monroe's tragic story? Let us know in the comments, and if you enjoy deep dives into Hollywood's most fascinating figures, don't forget to like, subscribe, and check out more stories of legends who left us too soon.